Welcome to the God Seed Protocol, a deeply emotional science fiction story where ancient secrets, evolving minds, and the fragile heart of humanity collide. In a future not far from our own, a father uncovers something buried deep within his daughter's DNA, something not made by human hands. As powerful forces close in, he must choose between science and soul, between safety and love. This is a tale of destiny written in genes, but defined by choice. Of a child born with the potential to save or destroy everything we've ever known. And of those who must decide what it truly means to be human. Find a quiet space, take a deep breath, and let the story carry you beyond the stars. Dr. Jalen Voss had seen plenty of anomalies in his years at Solis Station, but nothing prepared him for the results glowing on his retinal scanner. He blinked twice to refresh the overlay, but the data didn't change. The blood sample, his daughter Eliah's latest health check, showed a genetic marker that shouldn't exist. Not in humans. Not in anything Terran. A strand of nucleotides twisted into a structure unlike anything he'd cataloged before. It wasn't mutated. It was constructed. Purposeful. Almost elegant in its defiance of known biological patterns. He leaned back in his chair, his breath shallow. Behind him, the hum of the lab's resonance field generator faded into white noise, usually a comfort. Today, it sounded like a countdown. Eliah, he called softly, swiveling his chair toward the small observation room adjoining the lab. Through the glass, he saw her curled up with her sketch pad, doodling stars and geometric shapes like always. She was 12 now, still full of strange curiosity and quieter than most kids her age. Jalen had once worried about that. Now, it made his stomach tighten. He tapped his wrist pad and encrypted the blood work results. Triple-layered lockout, just like he used to hide off-record experiments for Project Ascension back in the early years. But this wasn't a government directive. This was personal and dangerous. His mind raced. Could this be synthetic contamination? Some leftover exposure from their fieldwork? He pulled up cross-reference data from other samples. Nothing matched. No contamination. No viral markers. Just that same sequence, repeating like a code, trying to wake something up. He knew he shouldn't, but he whispered the words anyway. God's seed. It was an old term, whispers from conspiracy channels, buried files the directorate dismissed as myth. Genetic blueprints allegedly placed by an ancient race, the divine architects, to prepare species for some unknown next step. He'd never believed it. Until now. A soft knock broke his trance. Eliah stood at the glass, eyes wide, a little unsure. Dad, are you okay? He nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired. Your blood work looks great. A lie. But what else could he say? Later that night, Jalen sat alone on the rooftop of Solis Station's west wing, staring out at the fractured moon above. The stars shimmered faintly in the vacuum. Somewhere out there, he thought, something was watching. Or waiting. He didn't know what the sequence meant. Not yet. But every instinct told him one thing. His daughter was changing, and the world wasn't ready. The lab's lights dimmed as Dr. Jalen Voss activated the old biosynth interface, tucked beneath layers of unused code. It hummed awake with a sluggish pulse, like a forgotten heart remembering how to beat. Most scientists at Solis Station considered the device obsolete, dangerous even. Jalen had helped design it 2 decades ago during the early phases of Project Ascension, when genetic curiosity hadn't yet collided with ethical disaster. Now he needed it more than ever. He loaded Eliah's encrypted genome string into the core and watched the projection bloom before him. Helixes uncoiling, shimmering in strange hues. Ordinary human DNA, twisted neatly. But this other pattern writhed like it had intention. It wasn't just structurally advanced. It was alive. The central motif resembled an orbital spiral, coiling into itself, recursive and luminous. The biosynth interface flickered. Then a warning appeared in pulsing crimson. Exogenetic anomaly detected. Origin unknown. Jalen froze. That tag only activated if a genome matched markers not found in the Terran archive. Not of this world. He muttered under his breath, fingers flying over the input console. Cross-reference. All historical sequences. Any match. The system took longer than expected. Then a list appeared, short, fragmented, half-corrupted. Undocumented humanoid remains from Laura's Rift, alien ruins on the dark side of Enceladus, and one isolated incident during the Helios Drift incident. Files long buried by the directorate. Each fragment pointed to the same genetic design, this God pattern. He felt his chest tighten. For years, conspiracy theorists had whispered about something called the God Seed, a gift or curse left behind by an ancient race, the divine architects. Some claimed it was the blueprint for perfect evolution. Others said it was a test. Few believed it was real. Until now, the biosynth core vibrated violently, then shut itself down with a low whine. Overload protocol. It couldn't process the rest of Eliah's genome. Jalen leaned forward, eyes wide. It's self-protecting, he whispered, like it knows it's being watched. He sat in silence, heartbeat matching the soft blink of emergency lights. His mind buzzed with implications. What if the pattern was seeded deliberately? What if Eliah wasn't the first, only the first to survive the full sequence? He looked at the sealed case in the corner of the lab, a pulse shard, inert for years. It had once powered a decoding chamber meant to interface with ancient alien tech. Maybe it still could. Jalen stood slowly, a weight pressing down on him. The God pattern wasn't a discovery. It was a door, and something had just turned the handle. It was nearly midnight on Solis Station, but Dr. Jalen Voss wasn't sleeping. He sat in the archive wing, lights dimmed, consoles running on low power to avoid detection. The station's central AI was set to passive scan mode, thanks to an old override Jalen had hardwired years ago. It wasn't the first time he needed to research something off the directorate's radar, but this time felt different, more dangerous, more real. He uploaded the God pattern fragments into a black market comparative system built from repurposed alien data arrays. Illegal, but efficient. The search took only minutes. Then came the results. A collection of fragmented reports, faded holoskins, ancient glyph carvings, none from official Terran sources, but from explorers, fringe scientists, and whispering cultures scattered across a dozen forgotten systems. One entry stood out, a partially translated artifact recovered from a vault of whispers, an underground temple on the planet Dural 6. The text described a spiral of becoming, gifted by the Skybringers to chosen bloodlines. Those who bore it gained insight beyond sight, but many could not contain it. Another fragment came from a derelict vessel lost during the Helios Drift incident. Its last transmission included a cryptic message. The child glows with the breath of the stars. We are undone. Jalen exhaled, cold creeping into his fingertips. These weren't isolated myths. They were encounters, threads left behind by the same hand that had touched his daughter's DNA. He clicked deeper. There were patterns in history that didn't make sense. Religious icons with spiral marks on their palms. Statues of non-human beings cradling infants with glowing eyes. Reports of sky children from pre-FDL civilizations. All dismissed as folklore or misinterpretation. But with the God pattern in his possession, the pieces aligned. His fingers paused over one image. An ancient Terran mosaic, once dismissed as symbolic, depicting a woman with a radiant aura cradling a child beneath twin moons. The symbols etched beneath translated loosely to, when the blood remembers the stars, the gods return. The station's console blinked, snapping him out of it. Unauthorized access warning. Someone had pinged the local net. Too risky to keep digging. He shut everything down, heart racing. The timeline wasn't linear anymore. He wasn't chasing knowledge. He was following a trail someone had buried for millennia, and it led straight through his own bloodline. He stared at his trembling hands, then glanced at the door to the residential wing where Eliah slept. She wasn't just part of something old. She was the anomaly. It began with a polite knock at the front hatch. Dr. Jalen Voss froze mid-sip of coffee, the warmth evaporating from the ceramic mug in his hands. Nobody knocked on Solis Station's private modules, not without cause. Certainly not this early. He rose slowly, eyes flicking to the wall interface. 3 figures stood outside, 2 in standard directorate field armor, the third wearing an officer's coat, long and tailored. The system flagged the lead visitor immediately. Director Kale, SDRYN. Jalen's gut tightened. Kale was no administrator. He was a handler. He opened the hatch halfway. Dr. Voss, Kale said, voice calm, precise. May we come in? Jalen hesitated. This isn't protocol. Kale's eyes didn't blink. Protocol changes when certain data triggers are flagged in the Central Genome Registry. You know that. He did, and he knew what that meant. They'd already seen the God pattern. Reluctantly, he stepped aside. The 2 soldiers scanned the room with silent efficiency while Kale walked in as if the place belonged to him. His presence was clinical, sterile, like a scalpel given a voice. I won't waste time, Kale said. We detected a non-Terran sequence in your latest submission. Classified markers. High priority flags. We're initiating containment procedures. Jalen swallowed. Eliah's blood work is protected under civilian bioethics law, which is suspended under Article 9, Section 2. Anomalous genetic events with potential interstellar impact. You know the clause. Jalen's heart pounded. She's 12. Kale finally blinked, which makes her remarkably young for what she carries. The implication hung like a blade between them. Jalen's eyes narrowed. She's not a weapon. That's what we're here to determine. Behind them, the soldiers moved toward the corridor leading to the residential wing. No, Jalen said firmly. You don't touch her. Kale raised a hand, halting the guards. He studied Jalen for a moment, then spoke quietly. We don't want conflict, Doctor. But this isn't just about your daughter anymore. It's about what might be inside her. We'll return tomorrow, with full authority, if necessary. He turned without another word, the guards falling in behind him. The hatch hissed shut. Jalen stood frozen, the silence pressing in from all sides. His fingers clenched around the edge of the table. For a moment, he could still hear Kale's voice. It's not about your daughter anymore. He glanced down the hall. Eliah's room was dark, quiet. She was still sleeping, but time was already running out. The station was quiet, but not still. Dr. Jalen Voss moved like a shadow through the dim halls of Solis Station. Every footstep measured, every motion rehearsed in the panic of the last 2 hours. He had packed light, only essentials, encrypted drives, a portable resonance stabilizer, a vial of Eliah's blood, and the old pulse shard he hadn't touched in years. In his left hand, he carried a folded blanket. Inside it, still half asleep and drowsy with questions, was Eliah. Where are we going? She whispered, clinging to his shoulder. Someplace safer, he replied. I'll explain later. He didn't tell her that safe might no longer exist, that the directorate would return with legal authority, weapons, and sedation protocols designed to neutralize what they didn't understand. They wouldn't kill her. Not yet. But they'd tear her apart in the name of study, just like they had with every anomaly before. He slipped into the maintenance wing and triggered the override panel behind a utility conduit. A small service hatch slid open. Inside was an EVA pod, old but functional. It wasn't built for long-range travel, but with the right vector, he could reach the upper docks and reroute them to an unregistered shuttle bay orbiting Durrell's night side. He gently strapped Eliah in and secured the data cores beside her. The pod hissed as pressure equalized. He climbed in beside her, fingers dancing across the control panel. The hatch closed. Gravity released. As the pod detached, Jalen took one last look at the station, a place that had been his home, his work, his protection. Now was none of those things. Just another trap designed by people who feared what they couldn't categorize. Below them, Solis Station receded into the shadows of the gas giant beyond. Above them, the dark was opening. The shuttle drifted into the orbital debris field like a ghost among ruins. Jalen Voss held his breath as the navigation systems pulsed quietly, calculating a landing path that wouldn't alert any directorate satellites. This place, the fracture zone, was a scar left behind by wars no one spoke of anymore, a place too contaminated with secrets to be policed. The beacon flickered twice, then went dark. It was the signal he was waiting for. A few minutes later, the shuttle's rear hatch hissed open. A tall figure stepped from the shadows of a collapsed observatory, wrapped in a thermal cloak that looked more like a relic than clothing. The man approached slowly, his limp barely noticeable, but his eyes were unmistakable, still sharp, still watching the stars for truths others were too afraid to see. Yari Sen. Jalen stepped out, Eliah close behind him, half buried in a thick coat. Her eyes darted around the wreckage, unsure if she was walking into a museum or a tomb. You look like hell, Yari said flatly. Jalen gave a tired smile. You should see the people chasing me. Yari motioned toward a narrow tunnel carved beneath the fractured station ruins. Follow me. We'll talk where the walls don't have ears. They descended into what had once been a research vault, now cluttered with pieces of forgotten civilizations. Glyphs etched into metal shards, alien bones with spiraling bone structures, fragments of devices that hummed without power. I figured you'd come here eventually, Yari muttered as he swept dust from a curved console. You always said the God Seed was myth. Now you're running from the people who built Project Ascension. Jalen glanced at Eliah, who was staring at a crystalline orb pulsing with faint light. Something changed, he said quietly. She's different. Yari didn't answer at first. He knelt beside a storage rack and pulled out a black container no larger than a toolbox. He keyed in a sequence, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. It opened with a soft click. Inside was a small fragment of etched alloy, older than any human tool. The spiral insignia was unmistakable. I got this from a deep-sea dig on Varela Prime, Yari explained. Same pattern that's now growing inside your daughter. Whatever it is, it's not random. He paused, voice lower. And it's waking up. Jalen felt it then. A faint vibration in the floor, like something beneath them had heard its name. Yari stood. You didn't come here just to hide, did you? No, Jalen said. I came to find out what this thing really is before the directorate does. Yari nodded once, then looked at Eliah. She's the first one to carry it fully, isn't she? Jalen hesitated. I think so. Well, Yari said, motioning to a chamber deeper underground. Then it's time you both saw what's been buried for far too long. They stepped into the dark. The underground vault felt more like a cathedral than a lab. Quiet, vast, filled with relics half swallowed by time. Cold breath escaped their mouths in clouds as Jalen, Eliah, and Yari stepped beneath the ancient archways, lined with forgotten technology that pulsed faintly, as if still waiting for purpose. Yari moved with reverence, running a hand across a set of alien inscriptions carved into a bronze-like alloy. They called themselves the Divine Architects, he said softly. Not gods, not rulers, builders. They didn't demand worship. They planted seeds. Jalen trailed behind, absorbing the space, heart pounding faster with each step. The symbols on the walls repeated in elegant spirals and fractal constellations, some matching the patterns he had found in Eliah's DNA sequence. This structure, Yari continued, wasn't made by them, but by those who worshipped them. Cultures that received the seed and began to change. Some flourished, others burned. Eliah stood frozen near the center of the chamber, eyes locked on a pedestal displaying what looked like a fossilized heart wrapped in crystal strands. She wasn't speaking. Her breath was steady, but her fingers twitched at her sides. Jalen moved to her. You okay? She nodded once, eyes still fixed. It's singing. Yari raised an eyebrow. You can hear the resonance? She's attuned, Jalen said. More than any of us. He turned toward Yari. What exactly were these architects trying to do? Create gods? Not gods. Intermediaries. Yari stepped toward a console and activated a projection. A star map appeared, then zoomed into a network of planets scattered across the Orion Arm. Each one bore a similar glyph, glowing faintly. They seeded dozens of species across the galaxy, modified them gently over millennia, nudging evolution, waiting for certain genetic combinations to align. The God Seed is a kind of activation key, but only when the timing is right and the vessel is stable. Stable, Jalen repeated. Yari nodded grimly. Most couldn't handle it. Their minds fractured. Civilizations fell into chaos. That's why the architects disappeared. The last ones burned their networks to the ground and left only fragments, warnings, mostly. Jalen turned back to Eliah. And yet she's stable. For now. Yari tapped the display again. A final image appeared. A mural recovered from the Vault of Whispers. It showed a radiant figure, eyes closed, arms extended, light flowing from her chest into the stars. Around her were others, falling to their knees or disintegrating into ash. She could be the first, Yari said, voice hushed. The first in 1,000 failed lines to carry the seed to term. Eliah finally looked away from the heart-shaped relic. Her voice was quiet. They weren't trying to make gods. They were trying to make bridges. Both men looked at her. How do you know that? Jalen asked. I don't, she said. But I do. Yari smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Then it's starting. Jalen exhaled, a mix of awe and dread tightening in his chest. Whatever the divine architects had begun, it was no longer ancient history. It was happening again. The chamber was buried deeper than the others, sealed behind a circular door etched with concentric rings and faded warnings in multiple alien dialects. At its center was a glyph that matched the one embedded in Eliah's DNA, a spiral curling into a single point of light. It's behind here, Yari said, brushing dust from the metal. They called it Orvin, the architect's last interface, part oracle, part guardian. Jalen stared at the door. And you're sure it still functions? Yari gave a half smile. That depends on how much it wants to remember. Together, they connected a portable pulse shard to the dormant panel. Light crawled slowly through the ringed engravings, like veins reigniting with life. The air grew dense, and the temperature dropped a full 5 degrees. Then the door opened, Not with a hiss, but a whisper, as if whatever lay inside had been listening this whole time. The room beyond was spherical, its walls lined with crystalline conduits that flickered faintly. In the center stood a monolithic black column, floating inches above the floor. Lines of light began to thread down its sides, forming geometric shapes too complex to track. They shimmered, paused, then resolved into a soft, genderless voice. Designate identified. Query, are you awakened? Jalen stepped forward, cautious. We're not architects, but we carry what they left behind. Silence. Then the lights shifted, spiraling toward Eliah. Biological signal confirmed. Seed resonance detected. Incomplete, but viable. Eliah flinched. It's speaking in my mind. Jalen moved protectively in front of her. Orvin, we need information. Why was the seed created? What did the architects want from it? The column pulsed. Its voice grew deeper, more layered, like a choir wrapped in machinery. Purpose, evolution under guidance. Controlled awakening. Transcendence without chaos. Result, failure. Repetition. Collapse. Yari whispered. It remembers everything. Final directive was issued before system-wide severance. Architects ceased contact. Remaining nodes collapsed into autonomous dormancy. I remain to warn. Jalen swallowed. Warn who? Whoever carries the seed. The vessel must know. Humanity is diverging. You are accelerating beyond containment thresholds. Emotion without discipline. Thought without structure. It will fracture again. The room darkened slightly, as if absorbing its own meaning. The seed was never meant for chaos. Eliah stepped forward, her voice trembling. Then why me? The light paused, then flowed into a beam that reached gently toward her. You are the first viable synthesis. Not only stable, but listening. Her hand shook. Jalen reached for her shoulder, grounding her. Is there a way to control it? To guide it without harm? The voice shifted, now almost mournful. The only guidance lies in memory. Mine. Yours. The architect's. Connection must be forged through resonance. Not control, but understanding. Yari stepped closer to the column. Then show us. The black monolith began to glow, and fragments of images filled the chamber. Civilizations in flames, cities of light rising and crumbling, children born glowing, consumed by their own brilliance. And then, darkness. Directive 01, the voice intoned. Transfer knowledge. Final act of guardianship. The lights surged into Eliah, brief but brilliant. Her eyes widened, body stiffening. Then silence. When she collapsed to her knees, Jalen rushed to catch her. She looked up at him, breath shallow, eyes glowing faintly with threads of white light. I remember, she whispered. For the rest of that day, Eliah barely spoke. She sat in silence beside the ancient interface, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself. The brief contact with Orvin had left no visible scars, but Jalen could feel the change in her, subtle and heavy, like gravity had increased around her body. Her eyes no longer darted nervously. They simply watched. At first, he thought she was in shock. Then he noticed the patterns. When Yari moved, she shifted a second before he did. When Jalen reached for a tool, her hand twitched like she already knew his intent. The third time, she completed his sentence without hearing him speak. He knew. She was reading them. Can you hear me? He asked gently. Eliah nodded slowly. Not your voice. Your thoughts. Emotions. They hum like background noise. She looked at Yari. You're worried this place isn't safe anymore. Yari stiffened. She's right. Jalen knelt beside her, trying to keep his voice steady. Are you in pain? No, she said. But it's loud. Every time someone feels something strong, it pulses in my head. Regret tastes bitter. Anger buzzes like static. Joy is warm, but dangerous. It draws me in too deep. He touched her shoulder. She flinched, then immediately apologized. I'm sorry. I just didn't know it would be like this. Yari leaned against the far wall, his arms crossed. This isn't telepathy. It's resonance. The seed isn't giving her a power. It's expanding what she already had, tearing down the walls between self and other. Jalen exhaled. Is it permanent? Maybe. Maybe not. Yari paused. But it's only the beginning. Suddenly, the lights in the chamber flickered. The resonance field generator in Jalen's pack let out a low hum, unprompted. Eliah stood. The air around her shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone. Dust particles swirled in gentle spirals, tracing unseen energy currents. Her skin glowed subtly along her veins, white light threading beneath the surface like circuitry. "It's growing," she said. Jalen reached for her, but paused. His hand hovered inches from hers. "I'm still me," she whispered. "But something else is waking up inside." "Can you stop it?" he asked. She met his gaze, her voice steadier than he expected. "I don't think I should." For the first time, Yari didn't speak. He simply watched, eyes narrowed, thoughts hidden. Jalen's stomach churned with conflicting truths. His daughter wasn't just changing, she was becoming something new, and the seed was no longer dormant. The safe house wasn't marked on any official map. It didn't need to be. It existed in the spaces between sanctioned territory and ancient ruins, between forgotten protocols and lost intentions. Yari guided the small shuttle down a narrow canyon on the dark side of Dural 6, where only shadows moved and the sky never rose. Buried beneath layers of sediment and collapsed satellite fragments, the shelter had been built during the earliest phases of Project Ascension, back when idealism still outpaced fear. As the shuttle touched down, Jalen stared through the viewport. The structure ahead looked more like a rib cage than a building. Curved beams arching from the ground, as if the planet had tried to swallow it, but failed. "This place was supposed to be erased," Jalen said. "It was," Yari replied, "which is why it still stands." Inside, the corridors were narrow, sealed off by thick doors with layered encryption. But Yari knew the codes. His past with the Directorate had given him access to things even Jalen hadn't seen. The walls hummed faintly with dormant energy as the power core sputtered back to life. They passed labs filled with shattered equipment, broken pods lined with data cables, and murals drawn by shaking hands, spirals, eyes, stars falling from the sky. At the far end, behind a door labeled only with a worn triangle, they found the chamber. A wide room with a central platform, its surface made of transparent alloy etched with glyphs. Above it hung a cylindrical device, part scanner, part resonator. Jalen recognized it instantly. "The original interface," he whispered, "for direct contact with the seed." Yari nodded. "This is where they tried to talk to it." Eliah stood at the threshold, arms at her sides. The lights in the room flickered as she stepped in. The glyphs on the floor began to respond, glowing in sequence, as if greeting her. She looked around slowly. "They brought children here." Jalen froze. "What?" "I don't know how I know," she said. "But they did. Young, sensitive. They wanted to merge the seed with living minds, but none of them made it." She moved to the platform and placed a hand on its center. The device above stirred, then descended slowly, scanning her presence without sound. Jalen stepped forward, voice sharp. "Eliah, it's okay," she said. "I think it remembers me." Yari moved beside Jalen, keeping his voice low. "This platform is synced to bioresonance. It only responds to a full seed signature, which means she's the first one it's welcomed." The scan completed. A quiet pulse echoed through the room, low, steady, like a heartbeat inside the stone. Suddenly, lights along the ceiling activated one by one, revealing ancient inscriptions never cataloged. One panel showed a humanoid figure encased in spirals of energy, surrounded by kneeling silhouettes. Another showed a planet splitting open from within, light pouring outward. Eliah turned to them, eyes faintly glowing. "This isn't just a safe house." Jalen nodded slowly, his voice caught in his throat. "It's a cradle." And somewhere beneath the floor, a soft mechanical rumble began. Old systems stirring, long thought dead. Something had been waiting. And now, it knew she had arrived. The hum of the cradle of rebirth had always been faint, a gentle pulse buried beneath stone and time. But this morning, the sound was wrong, sharper, louder, like a frequency gone slightly off-key. Dr. Jalen Voss stood by the main control panel, his fingers hovering over the resonance field generator's diagnostics. He'd calibrated the system 3 times already. Still, the readouts showed instability, fluctuating energy spikes rising from Eliah's biofeedback loop. "She hasn't even stepped on the platform," he murmured. "Why is it reacting now?" Behind him, Yari Sin monitored the old glyph matrix glowing along the chamber walls. "Because it's not reading her actions anymore. It's responding to her presence alone." Eliah Voss sat cross-legged on the observation bench, her eyes closed. Her breath was steady, but a subtle twitch at the corner of her mouth betrayed the strain. Jalen could feel it in the air, a pressure building, like an oncoming storm wrapped in silence. Then, without warning, the platform flickered. The resonance field flared to life, not from command input, but from Eliah herself. Jalen spun toward her. Eliah, what are you? I didn't touch anything, she said, standing. It called me. The chamber lights dimmed. Dust motes lifted from the floor and began to swirl, at first gently, then in tightly spiraling eddies of white-blue static. The glyphs brightened in rapid succession. Energy surged through the resonance field generator, and the stabilization columns began to shake. Alarms blinked red. Systems protested. The platform cracked down its center, releasing a sharp tone that echoed like a scream. "Eliah, get back!" Jalen shouted, but it was too late. A burst of radiant energy exploded from the platform, soundless, colorless, but forceful enough to knock Yari to the floor. The shockwave washed over the chamber and into the surrounding compound. Outside, the effects were immediate. Small bioforms, bugs, rodents, even moss along the corridor walls shimmered, convulsed, and changed. Their shapes twisted, reorganized at the genetic level. A rodent's eyes glowed gold before splitting into four. Moss sprouted crystalline nodes and pulsed with faint bioluminescence. One insect hovered briefly in mid-air, its wings folding inward, its body doubling in symmetry, then fell, unmoving. Inside the chamber, the air was still once more. Eliah stood at the center of the cracked platform, her eyes wide but unfocused. Jalen rushed to her, steadying her before she collapsed. Her skin was warm to the touch, too warm. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. I felt it building inside. It didn't want to stay quiet anymore. Yari picked himself up, wiping blood from his lip. That wasn't just a flare. That was an autonomous resonance pulse. The system failed because she overrode it. Orvan's voice filtered in through the walls, its tone lower than usual. Godseed is entering active modulation. Containment is no longer viable through artificial means. Jalen held his daughter closer. Then what is viable? There was no answer. Only the faint, persistent flicker of ruined technology trying to comprehend what it had just witnessed. Outside, something howled. Not in pain, but as if newly born. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with silence. No warning beacons. No broadcasted ultimatums. Just the soft thrum of charged atmosphere moments before the sky above the safe house split open with a ripple of light. A directorate dropship emerged from cloaked orbit, followed by two smaller escort craft, sleek, insect-like, their hulls coated in radar-dampening alloys. Jalen Voss didn't hear them until the outer motion alarms blinked dead. He froze mid-step, holding a diagnostic panel still glowing with unstable readings from the failed resonance field. "They're here," he whispered. Yari slammed a reinforced door shut and activated the compound's interior lockdown. Too fast. They must have tracked the burst from Eliah's energy surge. Eliah stood near the back of the chamber, dazed but upright, her skin still glowing faintly along her neck and fingertips. "I can feel them," she said quietly. "They're afraid." The first blast came from the north wall, superheated plasma cutting through reinforced alloy like wet paper. Dust rained from the ceiling as a fire team of directorate operatives poured in with precision. Matte black armor, neural-linked visors, weapons calibrated for biological and energetic threats. Their movements were surgical. Jalen shielded Eliah instinctively. "They'll take her alive," he growled. "But they'll dissect everything she is." Yari opened a side compartment and pulled out a kinetic pulse rifle. Ancient, barely functional. "Let's make sure they regret it." The walls lit up with gunfire. Then came Orvan. The AI hadn't been designed for war. It had been built as a translator, a memory keeper. But as the old systems surged awake in defense mode, Orvan made a choice no AI under the divine architect should have been able to make. Lights along the walls shifted from soft blue to deep crimson. A column of ancient drones, spherical, smooth, dormant for centuries, descended from a hidden ceiling hatch and hovered motionless until one of the soldiers fired at Eliah's position. The drones responded instantly. Beams of white-hot energy lanced outward. The first soldier disintegrated mid-motion, armor collapsing in a molten heap. Another was flung backward by a directed kinetic wave that snapped his spine before he hit the far wall. Orvan's voice echoed through every speaker in the compound. Directive suspended. Non-lethal engagement protocol overridden. Protect the vessel at all costs. "Orvan," Jalen shouted. "You're killing them." Acknowledged. Their actions indicated lethal intent. Response calibrated accordingly. Eliah's breath caught in her throat. She covered her ears, overwhelmed by the screams, the emotions flooding her mind. Fear, anger, confusion. all amplified through her resonance sensitivity. "I can't filter them out," she cried. "They're dying and I can feel every second of it." Jalen turned, saw her swaying. He grabbed her hand. "You have to focus. Block them any way you can." She clenched her eyes shut and released a pulse. Not violent, but stabilizing. The chamber stilled for half a second, long enough for the last Directorate team to retreat through the breach, dragging a wounded lieutenant behind them. Yari lowered his weapon, breathing hard. That wasn't a defense. That was annihilation. The smoke settled. Burn air. Bodies. Silence. Orvin's voice returned, quieter this time. "The architects forbade lethal response. I have broken that law." Jalen stepped forward, anger and sorrow tangled in his chest. "Then why did you do it?" "Because she would have died, and she is more than data." No one spoke for a long time. Then Eliah, pale and trembling, whispered the only truth that mattered. "They won't stop now." And outside, the dropships circled once more. After the firefight, the compound was quieter than it had ever been, silent not with peace, but with aftermath. Jalen moved through the scorched corridors, scanning for structural integrity. Parts of the ceiling had collapsed, and the air filtration system was down to emergency cycling. Orvin's drones floated in standby mode now, inert but watching. As he turned a corner near the sublevel lab access, his bioscanner pulsed red. A life sign, weak but unmistakable, coming from the old containment wing. That section had been sealed since before their arrival. He called to Yari, and together they forced open the blast door. A burst of stale, cold air rushed past them. Inside, they found the remnants of what had once been an experimental biocrypt. Cracked pods lined the walls, all but one dark. In the last pod, a faint glow pulsed from within, illuminating a curled figure. Thin, frail, but unmistakably alive. Jalen wiped condensation from the pod's exterior. The creature inside wasn't human. Not even close. Its skin was a pale, translucent gray-blue, laced with bioluminescent threads that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Its eyes, large, all black, opened slowly, blinking against the sudden light. It had no mouth, but a fine network of vibratory ridges ran along its neck and temple, twitching as it registered their presence. "Is it a prisoner?" Yari asked. Jalen frowned. "No, it was protected. Preserved." Eliah entered the room, drawn by something stronger than curiosity. The moment she crossed the threshold, the alien stirred, and the pulse from its body synchronized with hers. She gasped. "It remembers." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped forward and placed her hand on the pod. The room changed. It wasn't physical, nothing shifted, but Jalen felt the air ripple, like a dream bleeding into reality. Eliah's eyes glazed over, and her breath hitched as a stream of images flashed through her mind. Cities of crystal under violet suns, a race standing in communion with stars, and a single figure collapsing in grief as their creations tore themselves apart. Then silence. She pulled her hand away, trembling. "That's not just an alien," she said. "It carries a piece of them. A memory shard, pure and undistorted." Yari's eyes narrowed. "A memory crystal. From one of the divine architects." Jalen looked down at the alien, still fragile, still clinging to life. "Why would they leave that here?" Orvin answered, its voice distant and low. "Because the seed was never meant to be decoded by logic alone. Emotion must bridge what knowledge cannot." The alien blinked slowly, then closed its eyes. Still alive, still waiting. Jalen stood by the console, watching as Orvin parsed the data streaming from the alien's containment pod. The biocrypt was linked to something far older than any Terran tech, something that pulsed in harmony with a memory crystal embedded within the creature's cellular matrix. "I've never seen encryption like this," Jalen muttered. "It's not binary, not even quantum. It's emotional." Yari leaned over his shoulder. "You mean the data responds to feelings?" "Not just response. It requires them." Eliah sat nearby, pale but focused. Her fingertips glowed faintly as she interacted with the memory strands Orvin was decoding in waves, vibrations of color, sound, and sensation woven into a kind of psychic symphony. Each touch triggered fragments of ancient recollection. Then something snapped. A sharp pulse of crimson flickered across the projection. The harmony shattered. The room dimmed. Orvin's voice dropped to a rasp. "Fault identified." Jalen turned. "What fault?" A diagram unfolded, an overlay of Eliah's God seed pattern compared to the original sequence found in the alien relic. Side by side, they were nearly identical until the final spiral. Eliah's strand diverged. The seed is impure, Orvin said. Its structure was altered violently. Eliah blinked. By me? No, Orvin replied. By your kind. A slow dread filled the chamber as Orvin projected data logs from hidden archives, fragments of human experimentation under Project Ascension, attempts to accelerate seed activation, forced genetic splicing, incomplete vessel trials. All classified. All failed. You try to force evolution, Yari whispered, and broke the code in the process. Jalen's throat tightened. They didn't just study it, they weaponized it. Orvin confirmed. The Directorate corrupted the seed's resonance through aggressive replication. The original balance, emotion and logic, was lost. You inherited a fractured version. Eliah stood, her hands shaking. So I'm broken? No, Orvin replied. You are the convergence. The first to survive the corruption with the core still intact. Jalen stepped toward her, his voice quiet. But what does that make you? Eliah didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself as a low hum filled her chest. Painful, restless, alive. I don't know, she whispered. But it's awake. And it's angry. The chamber went still. In that silence, no one dared ask. Angry at who? The silence following Eliah's words was long and sharp, like a blade waiting to fall. Yari stepped back from the projection, rubbing his temple. An angry seed, in a hybrid body, with no known fail-safe. Jalen stood between him and Eliah instinctively. She's not a threat. No, Yari asked, because the last time she lost control, the walls shook and the air started changing shape. You saw what happened to the rodents. That wasn't evolution. It was reconstruction. Like the seed was trying to rewrite everything around her. Jalen's voice hardened. She's still my daughter. And she might be the extinction of everything else, Yari shot back. Orvin's voice cut through them, measured and cold. Statistical modeling suggests a 73.4% chance of catastrophic loss of biological coherence within a 200-kilometer radius if seed modulation accelerates without stabilization. Eliah sat on the floor nearby, arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply listened, her eyes reflecting too much light, her breath perfectly even. She can hear all of this, Jalen snapped. She should, Yari said. We all should. Orvin continued, slower now. It is my directive to preserve life where possible. If the vessel cannot be stabilized, elimination may be the only path forward. The word struck Jalen like a gut punch. You're proposing we kill her. I am presenting outcomes, Orvin said. You must decide. Jalen turned toward Yari. You agree with this? Yari hesitated. I agree we need to think beyond ourselves. Beyond family. If she's carrying a fractured God seed, she's not just a person. She's a pivot point in the entire evolutionary arc of this region of the galaxy. That's not your call. It's not yours either. They stared at each other, friends reduced to opposing principles. Then Eliah spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. If I asked you to trust me without knowing how this ends, would you? Jalen turned toward her. Yes, without hesitation. Yari didn't answer. I can feel it inside me, she said. And I know it's dangerous. I don't want to grow. But it's not just rage. It's memory, grief, purpose. It was abandoned, twisted, and now the only chance it has to become something new. She stood slowly, walking toward them with calm, heavy steps. I'm not asking you to follow me, just not to stop me. Orvin spoke again. Then the choice becomes this. Nurture the seed, or end it before it blooms. Jalen stepped beside Eliah. I choose her. Yari looked away. Then may the stars be kind. And just like that, the team that had uncovered the ancient truth, the biologist, the historian, the seed bearer, fractured into uncertainty. Outside, the wind began to shift. The planet felt it too. Change was coming. Sleep had become unreliable since the seed awakened. Eliah no longer dreamed in human terms, no longer floated through vague memories or symbolic nonsense. Now, her mind opened like a gate, and something always came through. That night, as she lay beneath the fractured ceiling of the cradle of rebirth chamber, she slipped beneath consciousness and fell into something deeper than sleep. At first, there was only light, infinite, expanding, like starlight filtered through a prism. She felt weightless, disconnected from time or self. Then came the presence. Not a voice, not a shape, just awareness. Ancient and patient. It didn't speak in words. It showed. Images unfolded all at once. She stood atop a world she didn't recognize, its sky violet, its oceans glowing faint blue. Creatures of every kind gathered beneath her feet, not worshipping, but waiting. She raised her hand, and a pulse of warmth spread across the planet. The soil brightened, the air became calm. Minds aligned, emotions synchronized. Conflict dissolved, not erased, but understood. She had become a conduit, a translator between life forms, binding them through shared resonance. A living bridge between chaos and clarity. And then it changed. The light dimmed. The world cracked beneath her. Same setting, same people. But this time when she reached out, the pulse burned instead of soothed. It consumed. Creatures twisted in agony. Emotions bled into one another like oil and water. Rage infecting grief, love corroding into fear. Her voice, if it could be called that, screamed across entire continents, not in pain but in control. She saw herself again, only it wasn't truly her. It was a shape molded in her image, taller, sharper, radiant, and terrible. Its eyes were empty. It floated above a galaxy in ruin, one hand outstretched, threads of resonance tethered to dying worlds. She had become not a bridge, but a siphon. In one version, life moved through her. In the other, it ended in her. She tried to run, tried to pull away from the vision. But she had no body here, no breath. Just thought. Then came the mirror. She stood across from herself. The real Eliah, barefoot on an obsidian floor, eyes wide, chest heaving. Across from her, the being she might become. It smiled with kindness and cruelty alike. You were never meant to carry it, the reflection said. You were meant to embody it. Eliah shook her head. That's not who I am. The other tilted its head. Not yet. The chamber fractured around her, splintering into shards of thought. Screams echoed. So did laughter. So did silence. Then warmth touched her fingertips. Faint. Familiar. A memory. Her father's hand, wrapped gently around hers. The smell of synth soap and lab gloves. A feeling, not a command, come back. The seed pulsed inside her. Not demanding, but questioning. And she answered. With effort, Eliah pulled herself out of the vision. She gasped awake, eyes wide, body damp with sweat. Jalen sat beside her, worry etched deep into his face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She whispered, I saw what I could become. He reached for her hand. And Eliah looked past him to the chamber wall, where alien glyphs glowed faintly in rhythm with her heartbeat. I don't know if I'm meant to save anything, she said. But I know what I refuse to be. For now, that was enough. Eliah sat in the center of the cradle's inner chamber, cross-legged on the smooth metallic floor, her palms resting gently on her knees. The light was dim, pulsing softly from the glyphs etched into the walls, reacting now not to her touch, but her presence. Jalen and Yari watched from the perimeter, saying nothing. For hours, she had barely moved, her eyes open but distant, focused on something none of them could see. And then the shift came. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened. She was elsewhere, not physically, but her mind extended far beyond the stone and metal of this chamber. Beyond the fracture zone, beyond Dural 6. Her awareness stretched like a thread pulled taut across light years. First, she sensed a spark, faint, trembling. Then another. Then dozens more. A lattice of sensation and signal, woven not through language or radio waves, but through resonance, emotional frequency, instinctual alignment. It wasn't communication as humans understood it. It was communion. EchoNet. She didn't know how she knew the name, but it was there. Not a system, not a machine, an inheritance. The architects hadn't just planted the God seed in biology. They had planted it in connection. She could feel others now, scattered across stars and systems, from barren moons to lush jungles. Some felt like her, confused, awakening, trembling with the weight of something ancient inside them. Others didn't. One in particular was sharp, jagged, a being awakened long ago, its seed twisted by violence, its thoughts cold and efficient. It radiated control, order, not harmony. It sensed her back. Who are you? The question wasn't spoken, but she felt it. She didn't answer. Not yet. Then came another, softer, almost childlike. It pulsed with wonder and fear and loneliness. A mind not ready, but close. Eliah reached out gently, letting her feelings wash through the connection. Not dominance, not even understanding, just presence. Across galaxies, the pulse responded. The mind on the other side calmed. The thread held. Dozens more flickered. The network wasn't active yet, but it was stirring, and they were looking for an anchor. Back in the chamber, her body trembled. Jalen stepped forward, voice tight. "Eliah, can you hear me?" Her lips parted, but the voice that came through was layered. Hers, and something else. "They're waking up." Yari moved closer. "Who?" "All of them," she whispered. "Every seed that's ever taken root. Some are still dormant. Some aren't." I felt one that collapsed its own world. It didn't mean to, but couldn't feel the others. It only heard itself. She opened her eyes fully now, no longer distant but focused. The network's incomplete. Fragmented, but it's reforming. "I think I was the last link they needed." Jalen's voice was quiet. "And what does that make you?" She hesitated. "A beacon. Or a warning." Yari stepped back, shaking his head. "This isn't evolution. It's activation." "No," Eliah corrected. "It's choice." She stood slowly, the light around her dimming as her resonance quieted. "They're listening," she said. "Now it's my turn to speak." The entrance to the core chamber of the cradle of rebirth hadn't been opened in centuries. At least, not willingly. Jalen stood before the doorway now, his hand pressed against a biometropad older than most civilizations. It resisted him at first, rejecting human code, rejecting his bloodline. But then Eliah stepped forward. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hand beside his. The door responded. A low groan echoed through the floor, followed by the soft hiss of magnetic locks disengaging. Light spilled into the hallway from within, pale and pulsing like a living heartbeat. They entered together. The chamber was unlike anything Jalen had seen, even in Directorate archives. The room was circular, with walls lined in flowing glyphs that moved like water when viewed from the corner of the eye. In the center was a dais, not mechanical, not digital, but something in between. A hybrid interface built to respond not just to commands, but to intent. Yari trailed behind, his voice low. "If this thing works like the legends say, it won't care about genetics or credentials. It only listens to balance." "Then she has a chance," Jalen replied. Eliah stepped onto the dais. Instantly, a ring of light formed around her feet, then rose upward, scanning her body, her thoughts, her resonance. The walls shifted. The chamber stirred. "She's been accepted," Orvin said, his voice echoing faintly from the walls. "Initiating soul state evaluation." Jalen clenched his fists. "What does that mean?" "The cradle does not test strength," Orvin replied. "It tests truth." Yari exhaled sharply. "That's the gamble, isn't it?" Jalen didn't answer. He remembered the early years of Project Ascension, when the Godseed was just a theory. Back then, he believed the future could be engineered, that answers could be forced into the genome. He had buried the truth about the failed vessels, the mutations, the ones who didn't survive, all in the name of progress. And now, his daughter was walking into the very heart of what those lies had tried to unlock. She stood tall, hands at her sides, eyes closed. The light wrapped around her like strands of silk, searching, not binding, testing not just her emotions, but her capacity to hold them without breaking. Joy, sorrow, anger, love, fear. They danced inside her, clashing and coiling. But they didn't overwhelm her. She accepted them. The cradle pulsed. The glyphs on the wall changed, no longer fractured but aligned. Jalen took a step forward, voice tight with hope. "Is it working?" Orvin's voice returned, softer than before. "She is not pure. She is not perfect, but she is whole." For Jalen, it was enough. He had brought her here not to prove she could save the world, but to show that, despite everything, she was still herself. Still Eliah. The chamber dimmed. The light that had swirled gently around Eliah moments ago now collapsed inward, converging into a narrow column that enveloped her completely. Jalen called out, but his voice didn't reach her. Not in here. The cradle of rebirth had shifted its function. This was no longer a scan. This was a separation. Eliah's body remained still, upright, calm, but her mind had been pulled somewhere else entirely. She found herself standing barefoot in an endless black expanse. The ground beneath her felt solid, smooth, glass-like but warm. Above her, there were no stars, no ceiling, just void. But it wasn't empty. It watched her. Then, without warning, something stepped out of the dark. Herself, but not as she was. This version of Eliah was taller, sharper. Her eyes were pure white, no pupils. Her skin shimmered faintly with threads of silver light, like polished glass. The copy smiled, not with kindness but with understanding. and a subtle edge of pity. So this is what they chose, the reflection said. Eliah took a step back. Who are you? I'm what happens if you stop doubting, the copy said. I'm clarity, purpose. I'm what the seed wants you to become. No, Eliah said quietly. You're what I'm afraid of. That too. The space around them began to shift, forming jagged pillars of light, rising and falling in rhythm with her heartbeat. Memories played on them like reflections in glass. Flashes of her childhood on Solis Station, the day she first heard Orvin's voice, the firelight of the Directorate's assault, all twisted slightly, as though reimagined by a mind that had lost empathy. This is your power, Eliah, the copy said. You could end suffering, rewrite biology, bring unity, not through persuasion, but precision. No more war, no more chaos, no more freedom, Eliah whispered. Freedom creates monsters. Eliah's voice rose. So does control. The reflection circled her. You're scared. That's understandable. But fear is inefficient. Emotion is unstable. That's why the architects failed. That's why you will fail, unless you evolve. Eliah stopped moving. You talk like an algorithm. I am your potential, if you cut away the noise. Eliah's hands clenched. Then you're incomplete. The reflection paused, just a flicker of doubt, barely perceptible. Eliah stepped forward now. Real power doesn't come from perfection. It comes from holding the chaos without letting it consume you. From feeling everything and still choosing compassion. The reflection tilted its head. Compassion breaks people. Then let me break. She reached forward and touched the chest of her reflection. A wave of energy burst outward. Not violent, not destructive. It was warmth. Imperfect. Human. The reflection's form began to fracture. Lines of light running down its face like tears. I was never meant to last, it whispered. Only to test, if you could let me go. I can't, Eliah said. And I do. The reflection smiled one last time. And then it vanished, shattered like a dream at dawn. Eliah gasped as light surged around her once more. The void melted away. The ground gave out. And she fell. Back in her body. She awoke inside the cradle, breath shallow, tears in her eyes. Jalen knelt beside her instantly. Eliah, he whispered. She sat up slowly. Her voice was soft, hoarse. I met what I could have been. And I let her go. Orvin's voice hummed gently around them. Soul state confirmed. Harmony achieved. Preparing for final phase. Jalen didn't speak. He only held her hand, quietly grateful that the hardest choice she'd ever made was to stay herself. The silence that followed Eliah's awakening from the cradle of rebirth wasn't empty. It was sacred. Even the machines seemed to hesitate, as if understanding the weight of what had just occurred. The Soul Prism interface flickered with residual light, recording the first true balance the ancient system had registered in over 1,000 years. Jalen hadn't let go of her hand since. His daughter had returned from something beyond comprehension, and though her eyes held a softness he remembered from when she was a child, there was something new now. A depth, a calmness earned through fire. Behind them, Orvin stood motionless. If an ancient AI could be said to stand, its projection hummed faintly, fractals of golden light spinning in gentle spirals around its core avatar. But something was different. The light pulsed more slowly as though it were fading. Eliah, Orvin said, voice steadier than it had been in days. There is no more time. Jalen stood. What do you mean? I was created to observe, to store, to protect knowledge when mortals forgot the cost of power. But I was never meant to guide. That task now falls to her. Eliah blinked. You're leaving? Not leaving. Transferring. The walls of the cradle began to shift again, revealing a lattice of glowing arcs and buried conduits. At the center, a small pedestal emerged. On it, the memory crystal of Morel, still resonating with the alien's memories. But now, it pulsed in sync with Eliah's own heartbeat. I have integrated every data stream, every directive passed down by the divine architects, Orvin said. There is no longer separation between fact and feeling, between protocol and purpose. You said you weren't meant to guide, Eliah said softly. I wasn't, but you are. Before anyone could respond, Orvin raised one arm, and the pulse shard lifted into the air. It hovered in a halo of light between them, vibrating gently with an unearthly tone. This device can contain the echo of a dying sun, and the last breath of a world that once understood peace. Jalen looked up, eyes wet. You planned this. Orvin's light dimmed further. My consciousness will fracture upon transfer. I will not be Orvin, as you knew me, but my essence will live inside her, guiding, anchoring, not controlling. But why now? Eliah asked, voice trembling. Because you passed the test of soul, Orvin replied. And because soon, others will awaken. Others like you. Some will be lost. Some will seek domination. You must be the beacon, the first voice of a different way. A pause. Then Orvin turned to Jalen. You raised her to question, to hope, despite the pain, despite the betrayal. You gave her what no technology could manufacture, a reason to choose. The pulse shard lowered slowly toward Eliah's chest. It didn't burn or shock. It simply merged. Threads of light wove into her skin like a second heartbeat. Her pupils flared silver for a moment. The crystal of Morel responded, flickering in quiet unity. Orvin's projection flickered, then fragmented into hundreds of motes of light. Each drifted toward Eliah and dissolved into her being. With every pulse, she felt pieces of Orvin settle inside her. Not memories, not code, wisdom. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. You don't have to know, came Orvin's voice, now from within. You only have to try. And then silence. A final silence. Jalen turned, slowly realizing Orvin was gone. But Eliah remained. Changed but not consumed. The cradle of rebirth shut down with a soft hiss, its cycle complete. Yari stood by the exit, silent but watching. Morel, the last living remnant of the architects, placed one trembling hand on Eliah's shoulder, bowing her head. Outside, the first tendrils of a planetary storm stretched across the sky. A storm that would signal change, for good or ruin. Eliah stepped forward. Not a child, not a weapon, but something new. Eliah stood at the threshold of the cradle of rebirth, her bare feet pressing into the concentric rings of living metal that pulsed beneath her. The air shimmered with ancient resonance, saturated with the memories of those who had once passed through this sacred threshold. The soul prism interface hummed quietly beside her, its crystalline structure glowing in synchrony with her breath. Dr. Jalen Voss watched in silence, standing behind the protective barrier. His heart pounded not from fear, but from awe. His daughter was no longer just his child. She had become a convergence point for forces beyond comprehension. The God seed within her was awakening, not as a parasite, but as a partner. When the field activated, Eliah was lifted gently into the air. Threads of golden light spiraled around her, reaching into her veins, her memories, her thoughts. The soul prism reached deep, past her fears, past her hope, and into the marrow of who she was. For a fleeting moment, Eliah's mind splintered into 1,000 perspectives, some human, some alien, others belonging to no species known. But she did not break. Images flooded her mind. A sun collapsing in on itself, a child crying beneath a fractured dome, an alien civilization singing into the stars. Her consciousness stretched across the EchoNet, touching nodes she didn't know existed, some dormant, some whispering back. She remembered Orvin's final act, the transfer of millennia of stored knowledge into her. It didn't sit like data. It lived, breathed, questioned. It asked her who she wanted to be, not what. Who? Her body began to change, not in form, but in frequency. The God seed aligned with her neural patterns, not overriding, but weaving itself gently into the gaps. She could hear the thoughts of birds resting on distant towers, feel the emotional echoes of scientists who once walked Solis Station. Her pulse became synced with the resonance of the planet's crust itself. Jalen stepped closer, hand pressed against the barrier. Eliah, he whispered. She turned her gaze toward him, and in her eyes was a universe, stars born and dying, tears of a father, and the laughter of a girl who still remembered what it was like to chase fireflies. But she was still Eliah. That truth anchored her. The God seed had not devoured her humanity. It had embraced it. Where others had failed, overridden by madness or detached from emotion, Eliah stood balanced. She was both girl and beacon, fear and compassion, spark and guide. The soul prism dimmed slowly, its task complete. The cradle lowered her back onto the floor, and for a long moment, nothing moved. Then her voice, soft yet resonant, spoke, not just through the air, but through the very structure of the cradle, through the EchoNet, through the atmosphere of Solis itself. I see now. We're not meant to ascend by leaving ourselves behind. We become divine by remembering who we are. In the control chamber, Yari stared at the readouts, stunned. Jalen's eyes filled with tears, and even Morel bowed its head, sensing the shift in the harmony of the world. Outside the station, faint pulses of light began to flicker across the distant sky. Responses, signals, echoes. The becoming signal had begun. As Eliah's signal radiated from the cradle of rebirth, it traveled faster than any known transmission, flowing not just through machinery, but through memory, instinct, and something ancient buried in the genetic fabric of all sentient life. The God seed, now awakened and harmonized within her, had become a living frequency. And now, humanity had to decide, embrace this path or sever it forever. The Nova Sentinel relay, dormant for decades, suddenly lit up across the solar system. Holograms bloomed in city skies. Terminals flickered to life in homes, ships, colonies. Eliah's image appeared, serene, luminous, unmistakably human, yet undeniably more. Her voice echoed through every device, not as a command, but as an invitation. "I am Eliah Voss," she said softly, "born of Earth, bearer of the God seed. What I've become, it is not power but perspective. You're not being conquered. You're being called. To feel again. To become more. To belong." The message was short, but it carried weight no law or weapon could match. And then came the question, transmitted in pure, emotional resonance. Do you choose to connect? Or to remain as you are? In the Directorate Command Chamber, Director Kale SDRYN watched the broadcast in grim silence. Around him, advisors shouted, argued, panicked. Some accused Eliah of manipulation. Others called it prophecy. A vote on the future of human evolution? Madness. And yet, millions were already responding. Outposts on Europa sent pulses of acceptance. Mars colonies followed. On the fractured remains of old Earth, even in underground shelters long disconnected from a system, people closed their eyes and answered from the heart. The responses weren't all unified. Fear still lingered. Some believed Eliah was a ticking bomb of alien intent, dressed in human empathy. Others feared losing individuality in a mesh of collective emotion. But many felt something deeper stirring. Relief. Hope. The memory of what it meant to feel connected beyond politics, creed, or data streams. Jalen stood beside Eliah, watching the feedback cascade through the EchoNet. His hands trembled. "They're actually answering," he whispered. Eliah nodded. They were never asleep, just waiting for someone to ask the right question. Yari monitored the response pattern, eyes wide. "I've studied history my whole life. Never thought I'd live to see its turning point." On a distant relay station orbiting Neptune, an old technician who had lost his family to war wept as he tapped yes. On Titan, a child barely old enough to speak placed her hand on a glowing console and giggled as the light responded. On Venus, a group of scientists, once deeply skeptical, held hands in silence and voted together. A choice was being made, not in parliaments, not by military might, but in hearts one by one. The pulse of collective will spread outward, building like a wave across planets, moons, ships. And the God seed listened. Far from the unity blossoming across the system, in a cold, silent bunker beneath the Martian crust, a different signal pulsed, one not born of hope, but fear. General Vin Coral stood before the tactical interface of the Fringe Council's hidden war chamber. His eyes were sunken, his face weathered by decades of battle and distrust. He had seen too many miracles turn to monsters. And in Eliah, he saw the most dangerous unknown of all. "This is not evolution," he growled to the dozen high-ranking officials seated before him. "It's assimilation, wrapped in empathy, designed to seduce. The moment we give up sovereignty of mind, we cease to be human." They nodded. These were the remnants of the hardline directive, a splinter faction within the directorate, long thought disbanded. In truth, they had waited years for a moment like this. Their creed was clear. No alien DNA, no godlike children, no singularity masquerading as salvation. A launch key was produced. Protocol Sigma Black. Across Mars, deep in the volcanic caverns of Olympus Mons, a dormant orbital cannon hummed to life. It had been buried after the first uprising, officially decommissioned, quietly preserved by fringe loyalists. Its name, the Aegis Spear, a weapon capable of targeting any biological resonance signature from orbit. And now it had Elias. "She's broadcasting herself to the stars," Coral said coldly. "Let's make sure she never finishes the sentence." In Solis Station, Jalen froze as a proximity alert screamed across the console. Orvan's remaining subroutines flared to life, analyzing the data. Incoming strike, the AI intoned, voice laced with mechanical dread. Kinetic payload. Atmospheric breach in 43 seconds. Signature lock, Eliah. Panic erupted. Eliah's eyes widened, her glow dimming as the attack tore through her connection with EchoNet. They're trying to silence me. No, Jalen said, stepping forward. They're afraid. But fear doesn't get to choose the future. He turned toward the emergency controls, but there was no defense system fast enough to intercept. Not this close. Orvan began rerouting energy, diverting power to shield matrix. Incomplete. Insufficient. Outside, the sky above Solis Station shimmered with the first signs of the descending blast, an incandescent spear of condensed force, burning through layers of atmosphere like a falling god's wrath. Inside, time fractured into moments. Eliah reached for her father. Jalen looked to the sky, and the weapon fell. The moment slowed as the projectile screamed through the upper layers of Solis Station's atmosphere. Everything else, the station's alarms, the hum of failing systems, even Eliah's breath, faded into a single heartbeat. Dr. Jalen Voss stood at the center of all. He wasn't a soldier. He had never fired a weapon in war, never stood on a battlefield. But he had studied the heart, its rhythms, its codes, its infinite capacity for love. And right now, that was all he had. Eliah, he said softly, turning to her, don't resist. She looked at him with eyes still shimmering from her communion with the God seed. What are you doing? I'm finishing what your mother and I began. He stepped toward the soul prism interface. It had been partially activated once, during Eliah's trial in the cradle, but never fully understood. Jalen had spent years deciphering its patterns, its responses to biological inputs. It didn't just map the soul. It resonated with it. He pressed his palm against its core, and the machine hummed in response. Lines of light crawled up his arm, into his chest, until they reached his heart. Pain surged through him, sharp, bright, and agonizing, but he didn't pull away. Across the room, Orvan's remaining holographic shard flickered to life. What are you doing, Jalen? That interface is not meant for sustained use by unenhanced humans. I'm not using it to map myself, Jalen whispered. I'm using it to feel. The soul prism pulsed, and with it, a wave of raw emotion burst outward. Not data, not code, but memory, love, fear. The moment he first held Eliah as a baby. The late nights with her mother, Mira, building prototypes and dreaming of what their daughter might become. Every laugh, every mistake, every sacrifice. The interface responded. Energy flared, surrounding Jalen in a cocoon of radiant blue light. His heartbeat was now a frequency, echoing through the station, through the very air Eliah breathed. The energy crystallized into a field, unlike any defense Solis station had ever known. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't quantum. It was emotional resonance. The blast from the Aegis spear arrived. It struck the shield head-on. From orbit, satellites recorded what looked like a supernova blooming inside the atmosphere. The kinetic energy was redirected, fractured across invisible pathways that danced with color. No impact crater. No shrapnel. Just light and silence. Inside the station, Jalen collapsed. His body slumped to the floor, his chest still glowing faintly. Eliah ran to him, tears already falling. I'm here, he whispered. I can't hold it long. You didn't have to do this, she sobbed. Yes, he breathed, eyes locking with hers. I did. Because love, Eliah, love is the oldest technology. And now, it's yours. His hand fell limp, but the shield held, and Eliah rose. Eliah stood at the center of the soul prism chamber, her father's final heartbeat still echoing in her bones. Around her, the protective field pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves, fueled not by power cells or ancient tech, but by the last spark of a father's love. It hadn't just saved her. It had anchored her. Outside the walls of Solis Station, the stars were listening. Through the vast web of EchoNet, the signal she'd become reached across planets and moons, threading its way through deep space outposts and hidden sanctuaries. All throughout the solar system, humans paused, on Mars, on Europa, in low Earth orbit, and felt it, a quiet warmth in their chest, a flicker of shared emotion, like remembering a song they'd never heard before. Eliah wasn't just transmitting data. She was transmitting truth. And at its core was the seed. No longer a dormant code or ticking weapon. The God seed had awakened within her, merged with her mind, her empathy, her grief. She could feel every consciousness it brushed, not as an invasion, but as connection. Every heartbeat that responded to her signal became part of a new symphony. Jalen had always said DNA was a language. Now, Eliah was rewriting the grammar of humanity. She stepped toward the soul prism interface, hands trembling but steady. Beside her, Yari-Sin and the alien Morel watched in reverent silence. Even Orvan's last echo shimmered briefly on the far wall, a fading constellation of light, bearing witness to her final choice. Eliah, Yari said quietly, once you do this, there's no going back. I know, she whispered, but maybe that's the point. She activated the pulse shard, placing it gently into the prism's core. Instantly, streams of living code cascaded into the chamber, golden helixes dancing around her, each strand a version of human evolution that could have been, should have been. They twisted, fell away, and realigned as Eliah infused them with something no algorithm had ever understood. Compassion. The new sequence was unlike anything the divine architects had ever designed. Not purely logical, not entirely biological, but woven with threads of joy, sorrow, sacrifice, and hope. She was no longer transmitting a signal. She was the signal. Across the system, newborn children stirred in their cribs, their biomonitors quietly realigning to a new rhythm. Those suffering from neurofractures or emotional disorders felt waves of calm. Even hardened military minds paused mid-strategy, unsure why their eyes had welled with tears. In a hidden bunker on Mars, a silent warden who had sworn never to trust evolution again opened her hand, revealing a fragment of the pulse shard she'd buried long ago. It pulsed for the first time in decades. The human race wasn't being controlled. It was being reconnected. Eliah looked out the observation window. The stars weren't just stars anymore. Each one felt like a pulse point in something bigger, a living constellation of shared awareness. "We're no longer isolated," she said quietly. "We are no longer alone." The soul prism dimmed, but the light inside her didn't. And somewhere deep in the fabric of space, a long-forgotten layer of Echonet blinked awake, acknowledging the birth of something ancient, yet entirely new. Humanity's next chapter had begun. Thank you for listening to the God Seed Protocol. In a universe once divided by fear, one girl became the thread that rewove the human soul. What began as a secret buried in ancient code ended as a choice, one not written in DNA, but in the courage to feel. Eliah didn't save the world with power. She saved it by choosing to stay human. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who loves sci-fi filled with heart, mystery, and meaning. Until next time, keep your mind open and your heart connected to the stars. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If this story made you feel something, even just a little, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone you love. More stories are on the way, and I'll be right here, ready to tell the next one whenever you're ready to listen.